In this podcast, I speak with Tatiana about COP28 and how it feels to be a part of such an international policy conference, albeit on the sidelines. It's a fascinating insight into the fringes of such events and how people there sense and perceive their own roles and places. The term "in the car park" is mentioned, and I wonder how much clearer could the intentions of the organisers have been. As if to be even clearer, we go from COP28 in the Arab Emirates, an oil state with blood on its hands, to COP29, another oil state with blood on its hands and murderous military drone controllers in its hands too. Thank you, Tatiana, as always, for your great input, for your arguments and observations, and for your time. There are important links in the podcast notes to the Boss class from The Economist, the World Ocean Summit 2024, and Harvard Kennedy School's Women's Network. Please check them out. Two and a mic, clocking out. Enjoy.
Don't weche pek kod welo mabiro tu under mic. Don't parodit kod jok mawuoye tu under mic. Seche tin sud buta wawinjie tu under mic. Wola wachokre wabed piny bi wawinje ero chako moment ndi and a podcast makende.
I'm joined again by Tatiana, who hasn't been around for a long time because Tatiana is extremely busy. Is that not the case, Tatiana?
I don't think so, but nice to be back. How are you, Zach?
Yeah, very good, very good. Especially as we have a chance to chat. And what's also quite funny, people probably don't realize, I'm not actually friends with everybody who I have a podcast with because I don't know so many of the people that I have podcasts with. But you actually do know, you are a friend. And considering that, we hardly ever talk. So, I mean, that should be a bit of an indicator as to how busy you are. But yeah, there you go. But are you well in London and so on?
Yes, I am. I am just sort of, getting back into the flow of work and life, because of course everyone took a nice, much needed break over the holidays, although they seem very far away right now. But we're only into the third week of January. So yeah, just trying to stick to the resolutions that we made while also managing everything that we continue to manage.
Okay. All right. So your resolutions, that definitely means a dry January and no parties, right?
That'd be ridiculous. No.
Okay,
Let's be realistic.
Enough. Yeah. I apologize.
I don't say unrealistic, but also I think that I mean, my personal view on dry January is I think it's great for people that want to do it. And if they feel like they need to do it, then that's something that people should do. I would never sort of take that away from others. But you should, everything in moderation. So if you break up your year and not drink every single day, and then you wouldn't need to do a whole month of dry January, because that's not actually helping you, in my opinion, at least anyway. I'm no doctor, but that's my opinion.
No, fair enough. But so let's talk about some of the things which have kept you out of, incommunicado at least. One of these things is, as with the others, I suspect, more than justifiable reason. You have continued work with the World Ocean Programme, and you are actually going to tell us when your next conference is, I think.
Yeah, so the World Ocean Summit is coming up. It's actually around the corner, 11th to the 13th of March. It's one of the things that's keeping me busy. It's going to be taking place in Lisbon, Portugal. Again, we hosted it there in 2023. And it's gearing up to be an excellent event. We've got over 180 speakers confirmed. Well, almost confirmed, but we're going to have over 180 speakers. I think we're on about 150 at the moment. Expecting over 1,500 people from all over the world. Last year we had something like 87 countries registered to attend. And so, yeah, I mean, it's the sort of meeting point for everyone in the ocean ecosystem, from the academics to the business leaders to the investors, the philanthropic community, NGOs, and of course the multilateral, bilateral institutions, and let's not forget the policymakers. So yeah, it's a great meeting point for many. We're launching some exciting programs at the summit. Can't go into too much detail about them, but there's going to be one on there's one research program on marine protected areas, and another one that's going to be on how ocean observation data streams can mitigate climate change. So really sort of unique and one of a kind research projects that we're going to be launching at the summit, and hopefully they'll be helping solve some of the big questions and challenges that we have.
Okay. Well, all right. That's fair. Obviously, that you can't talk about some of the more secretive projects that you're going to be either announcing or launching at this year's event. But can you tell us about one or two, maybe, of the successes from last year's event?
Oh my gosh, you're making me go back in time now.
I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry.
It's fine. Let me think. Well, you know what? I mean, there was a lot that happened. I think what was really interesting about last year's event, and it was the first one we had hosted since COVID, so it was the first time everybody had come back together, which in itself was a miracle, because for the last from 2021 we couldn't run the 2020 event, but 2021, 2022 everything happened online. And while it was great, it's very hard to have, and you have to have a lot of bilateral meetings in person. I mean, some of these conversations, they just it's not the same. And I know a lot of people question, why do you have to be in person to have these meetings? Why does everyone have to travel to one place? What a waste. But actually, they're quite helpful, because having those one-to-one meetings, building those relationships are important. In terms of some of the key takeaways, well, I think the high seas negotiations were taking place on the sidelines of our summit. That was happening in New York at the same time. So there were a lot of conversations about the impact and the importance of those. And we had the deputy director of the World Trade Organization at our summit talking about this, which was important, and having those stakeholders in the room. We had a lot of financial institutions participate, and actually they were hosting sessions on the sidelines, asking the wider investment community questions to kind of help address sort of big questions that they have around developing financial models. So I think a lot of those types of conversations were really interesting, and it was it was helping to troubleshoot. And in fact, what it's inspired us to do is to run what we call in 2024 how-to sessions, which are going to be interactive panel discussions, workshops, where we'll be troubleshooting through certain types of questions, like, for example, how to implement the High Seas Treaty, how to create an MPA, and so on. So, yeah, they should be interesting. Everyone that comes to the event is an expert in their own capacity, and the ability to sort of allow the audience to interact with the speakers and vice versa will be very helpful, and it sort of leads to solutions rather than just a talk shop, which is what tends to happen at a lot of events, where basically panel speaks, they get off, next panel, but you kind of walk away not really knowing how to act. And I think that's the important thing. We need to have takeaways so that people can think about what comes next.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's always been one of the issues that I've had with some of the very, very low level conversations that I've participated in. I always feel as though whenever people come together, they make these wonderful decisions. And as you say, when you're actually together, there is a certain dynamic that is created by people coming together, working together, this atmosphere, this electricity, this vibe, this energy, which is kind of transferred from one to another. But the unfortunate thing is that once the event is over, that energy kind of dissipates, and people go back to things as they were before, and nothing solid happens thereafter. So hopefully with what you're saying, that's not going to be the case with this. But I mean, the World Ocean Programme, Okay, obviously, I'm not a specialist in the history of these kinds of initiatives, but I don't think it's too old, is it, in its existence?
Um, it is actually. It's been around. This is the 11th year we're running the World Ocean Summit.
That's what I mean. That's not very long. As in,
Well, no.
what you've done, though, I'm trying to get to a compliment, Tap, not criticize. Yeah, they're like, God, you've got no history. No, but I think in 11 years to have, yeah, I mean, you've got a lot of important political participation. You've brought so many specialists together, so many important organizations together.
Hmm.
That kind of suggests to me that there's a serious amount of work going on in the background, is what I'm trying to get at, basically.
Yeah, I mean, look, for context, 11 years ago, nobody was really talking about the ocean, frankly speaking. And what we didn't really understand. So there would be siloed conversations. Of course, the NGO community and many scientists were sort of pushing forward agendas on these issues, but it wasn't something that either grasped the public's attention and or many of the policymakers or business leaders who didn't really understand the role that the ocean plays with climate. And even you still see this today. There is still a massive knowledge gap when it comes to when we refer to the sustainable ocean economy or talking about the health of our ocean, the role that we play as individuals and the impact on climate. So yeah, when we started this, it was obviously long before my time, but we were approached by two philanthropic organizations that wanted to put this on the global agenda. Obviously, our paper was well placed to do this, given our global reach. And I think we've helped succeed in that effort. There are, of course, a lot of other organizations now doing their own thing as well to push this agenda forward. There's a lot of other multilateral events taking place around the world. There's now ocean science events, and there's the UN Decade event coming up in April in Barcelona. There's Our Ocean, which has been running for the last few years. It's actually under the auspices of the US State Department, but hosted by different countries each year. There's the UN Ocean Conference, which happens every few years. The next one will be in France in 2025. The Prince Albert Foundation runs their own ocean summit in Monaco every year. And we all collaborate with each other, by the way. I think that's something to note, that we are all collaborating and working together. It's not as if we're all doing something in silo, which is great to see, because I think we moved into the era of collaboration and partnerships versus sort of everybody working in silos, which is what we used to see a lot of.
Yeah, well, I mean, partnerships is also one of the Sustainable Development Goals, so it's good to see at least one of them bearing fruit. Yeah, okay, cool. I'm going to move it along purely because we've got so many things to talk about, and the main topic is COP28. But before we get to that, just a brief interlude. You went to India. In what capacity was that event? Was that something sort of private that you did for your one of your many interests, or was that something else?
So that was on behalf, wearing my hat as co-president of the Harvard Kennedy School Women's Network. So the Harvard Kennedy School Women's Network is a 501c3. It's a nonprofit registered in the US. It represents something like 7,800 alumni from the Harvard Kennedy School. And the organization was set up back in 2016. I took over the co-presidency with my peer Farah Arabi last year. So India was hosting the G20 last year. They were holding the presidency for the G20, and one of the engagement groups, the Women's 20, which is the official gender equality engagement group for the G20, approached us about partnering with them as a knowledge partner on the efforts of the W20, because there are different engagement groups who then go off and put together policy recommendations that are put forward to the G20. And so we were invited as knowledge partners. We took on an advisory role. Of course, the delegate countries are the ones that have the sort of, they lead the negotiations. They sort of finalize what goes into the final communique, etc. But we, like many other knowledge partners, sort of provided input. And one of the key areas, so there were a couple of areas that we had critical input on: care economy, which was actually something that wasn't initially included in the original sort of breakdown of tasks, task force for the W20. And then the other one was entrepreneurship, and then climate and gender. And given my background, I was asked to lead the zero draft policy recommendations on gender and climate. And so we tapped into our wonderful member community. We have so many sort of well-accomplished people working on a lot of these areas, and then pulled together some of our initial recommendations, which were then reviewed by the sort of W20 delegates. And then we had input into the sort of additional iterations of that. And it was great to see so many of our early recommendations adopted into that and working with the W20. And in fact, Brazil, which is going to be holding the presidency for the G20 this year, has already invited us to once again become a knowledge partner of the W20. So we're looking forward to working with Team Brazil like we did India. And I have to say, Team India were incredible. The level of attention, the seriousness of how they took the whole process, the hospitality. India is such a beautiful country. The people are wonderful. It was really a wonderful experience. And it was an opportunity, because I've always been saying to my friends, I'm going to visit you, and time is always the challenge. So being able to go to India twice in a year was a real treat for me.
Yeah, respect. I saw some of the follow-up to the event with all of the interactions across social media platforms, and it seems so you all really got on nice and cozily, but at the same time you also did some sterling work. So it's something that we should also keep an eye out for in the future, I guess, depending on what kind of projects that you lead and where it will go.
Yeah, I think I'll be honest with you. I think the proof is in the pudding, and I think it's the action, turning these things into action. Like, so we were very lucky, because actually the G20 leaders, they adopted a lot of what we had put in our in the final W20 communique. They actually included it in theirs. And I think that that's a great achievement. But then it's like how do you implement it? And the G20 is a very influential group of countries. And so, I think it's critically important to turn the recommendations into action.
So talking of turning recommendations into action, we come to COP28, which you also participated in.
I did. I went on behalf of the Economist group. Obviously, we're using my work on the ocean front. It was great. It was my first COP. I didn't quite know what to expect, but I knew I obviously have experience having been to Dubai a few times, so I know that they weren't going to sort of do short change on this opportunity. And they hosted it at the Expo Center. So this is where they hosted the Dubai Expo, which was supposed to be taking place in 2020, but ended up taking place in 2021. And it was very chaotic. It was very busy. There was so much going on. The area where they hosted it was huge. Feedback I had from other people was that Egypt and Glasgow were much smaller, so they were easier to get around. But even then, it was just, there was so much happening all at the same time that it was hard to kind of get from A to B and kind of attend everything. But what was great to see was that the ocean community was there in full force, pushing the agenda forward. And again, as I mentioned earlier, that, there is a disconnect between climate and ocean. So, pushing that agenda forward was great to see. I gave a presentation on the sidelines at one of the side events at COP with a number of other people, and sort of focusing on the kind of work that we're doing, the research that we're doing, and how we're contributing to transitioning to a sustainable ocean economy, and meeting so many other like-minded people. It did feel sometimes there was a phrase that kept coming up. Actually, it was by the UN Ocean Ambassador, who kept saying, "We're in the car park, we're in the car park," because the nature pavilion was all the way at the bottom, quite somewhat removed. And so it did feel like we were still in the car park trying to get our way into the, and be front and center of the sort of COP agenda. But the good news is that marine ecosystems and the ocean were included in the sort of final communiques again. So that was great to see. What that actually translates into remains to be seen. So yeah, I mean, it was a great experience. Obviously, when I was an observer there, I was not part of the negotiations. Only that's reserved for country delegates, of course.
Sure. Okay. Now, obviously, because of your numerous diplomatic hats that you wear, at least for the purposes of the conversations that we have together, I will tone down any kind of opinions that I may have, especially as you're not somebody who represents any of the, as far as I'm concerned, the bad guys in any of the climate arguments. But there were a number of controversies with regards to COP28. And what I find really, on the one hand, quite amusing, on the other hand, not really much of a surprise. About a couple of hours ago, you posted an essay on social media written by, and I've made a note of
Paul
this.
Pullman.
Yeah, exactly. Where he says that it is extremely important that climate change policy is intimately engaged and irrevocably linked to human rights.
Yes.
That's correct, yeah?
Yeah. He talks about the fact that you can't have the one conversation without the other.
Indeed. Okay, very good. All right. So on that basis, so to have COP28 in the United Arab Emirates, but not only that, to have COP29 in Baku, a tyrannical regime with numerous human rights violations, not to mention the extremely disturbing activities that they carried out against the Armenians in Artsakh not very long ago. I think a lot of people need to read this essay.
100% would agree with you on this. I think if anyone is quite serious, I mean, and I just wanted to read, he's not suggesting that, let's all skip COP29, because he clearly says that it's something that needs to happen. Although I'll be honest with you, even in Dubai, most people's attention is focused on COP30, because that's where we're going to see some key things coming into play. But there's still a lot of negotiations that need to take place, and COP29 is the arena to do that. It's just, how do you do that when you've got this sort of backdrop, as you've put it? And I just don't think, and I speak to people who are not involved in this space, your Jane and Johns on the street. And it's very hard, especially as we live in this very polarized world, where everyone's skeptical about something, and, everyone's cynical. Not everyone, but most, a lot of, well, not everyone and not most, but you meet a lot of cynics. And it's very hard trying to convince them that there's, that these are genuine efforts, that the world is trying to work together, that there are all these, that businesses do care, and so on and so forth, when we overlook certain things like where we're going to host an event like this. So it is problematic. But also, I mean, there's the argument to be had, which is you can't leave people out, because you need everyone you need everyone's consensus. Look, if it's like with and this is one of the big challenges we have, that any country can stand up and say, I veto this, I veto that, and you need a consensus. I mean, one of the reasons why things like the fishing subsidies agreement took so many years and they're still not really finalized, frankly speaking, is because, obviously country interests meant that the negotiation process became even tougher. And then you have to try and find a consensus with everyone. So, leaving them out in the cold isn't necessarily the right solution either. So I'm not saying, so what I guess what I'm trying to say is I don't really have an answer for this, but I think that there needs to be some pressure on them to guarantee certain rights, guarantee freedom. I mean, I've been told that it can be very controlled over there in the way in which the reporting is done. So people would need to, we need to address these things. We can't just ignore it. But it would have been, I'll be honest with you, it would have been a hell of a lot easier if we had just, if everyone had just agreed to host this somewhere where you wouldn't have had these challenges. And then you can bring all the different parties together and still have a constructive discussion. And then you don't need to sort of host it in these awkward places where it's awkward for half the international community and okay for others. It's just thinking about that. But this is my opinion. I remember speaking to a friend who's not very well versed on the human rights violations of Baku and Azerbaijan, but then sort of saying, oh, well, this and that. And so, everyone has their own opinion about who's a human rights violator and who's doing what and which country's good and which country's bad. And, you end up in a rabbit hole of my plight is worse than yours. Who's deciding? I mean, it's a rabbit hole is what I'm getting at.
I'm with you. Yeah. If anybody's listening to this and thinks that I'm of the opinion that, oh no, keep it in the UK, let it stay in the UK the whole time. No, I completely am aware of a lot of the human rights violations that the UK is responsible for, continues to be. I'm not Eurocentric. I'm not Western democracy centric. I'm fully aware of this. But I see the argument that you put forward. We should not exclude people. That's true. But not excluding them doesn't mean going to their homes. As in, if I want to talk to somebody who I don't like, I'm not going to walk into their kitchen, sit at their table and shake hands and pretend everything is hunky-dory. What I feel is that by giving, especially human rights violators, especially countries which are responsible for so much of the emissions which we have recognized, which are huge contributors to climate change, we're giving them opportunities to sort of wash over that. They're showing themselves out. It's like, yeah, they start clapping. Hey, look what we've done. Blah blah blah. You've done bugger all. And
I think
go on.
I agree with you. And actually, I want to address something because I think that there's an oversimplification that takes place when we talk about, yes, we don't always make, like I say, we as in Britain, we don't always make the right foreign policy decisions, right? I'm not saying that we always get it right or that we do get it right. And each person has an opinion on this issue. However, the thing that everyone always seems to forget, and I love it because it's everybody who's complaining about these issues, but they're doing it in the comfort of their homes in the UK, and they know that there's no recommendations for what you're saying, because nobody, we live in a free country, and I think that sometimes it's easy to forget the wonders. I mean, until you've lived in a restricted country where your speech is really restricted, where your ideas and your thoughts cannot be put forward, you will never understand what it means to be living such a limited life. And I think that we don't always get it right, but at least we get to live our lives with dignity and the way in which we want to. And I think that that's something that sometimes we forget. I'm not saying it's always been perfect. I'm not saying that it's always been great for everyone. But on the whole, in the comforts of the UK or wherever, you have the luxury of being able to have an opinion, and no one reprimanding you for it.
True. I would just add to that a lot of those freedoms and privileges are enjoyed at the cost of other people's freedoms and the lack of privileges as a result. Capitalism has to always exploit someone, right? So that's just the way that it works. But you and I we've always said we're going to have a conversation about this topic, but we never find the opportunity of doing that. But we will do. We'll come.
Because we're on different sides of the debate, but we should actually one
Exactly.
day.
That's why, I love talking to people who I agree with, but I especially love having an argument with people. Yesterday I interacted with a guy on Twitter, and I put forward a couple of normal questions. He then went and looked at my profile, and he responded to me and said, "You're a socialist. I'm not going to talk to you," and he blocked me.
Are you
And
serious?
yeah, I hadn't even said anything. I hadn't insulted him at all. And yeah, you're a socialist. I'm not talking to you. And I thought, okay, that's one way of doing it. So yeah, you and I don't have to agree. But I'm looking forward to having a conversation with you about this, because whatever happens, I know that I'm going to walk away from that conversation having my immense respect for you. And I
Well,
hope,
let me
yeah,
let
go
me
on.
tell you. I mean, it's interesting that you bring this up, because I've had people sort of say to me, "Oh, I can't be friends with you because you're not a socialist," and I think to myself, Jesus, how small is your world? I mean, I personally do not pick friends based on their political affiliations. Otherwise, I'd not have a lot of friends. Um, and even like football clubs, like, defining people by, I mean, of course, within reason. I think we've talked about this before.
Yep.
Well, there's certain things that I draw a line on,
Mm,
but
mm.
if someone is a Labour supporter, I'm not going to not talk to them. If someone's a Conservative, I'm not going to not talk to them. If someone's a Liberal Democrat, I'm not going to speak. It's very silly. You don't define people by just their political beliefs, or if they're religious or they're not religious, or they're this or they're that, or they're like, this is not how you. It's not a way to live, really.
Yeah.
You live a very limited life.
Yeah, but we'll have a proper conversation about that at a later point, because I really want to jump into that and analyze it a lot. But just a couple more points on this, because we always hear reports about these COP conferences, and because you were actually there, you would have felt what it was like. But just 2 points, and I'd love for you then to tell me how that may or may not have influenced the general atmosphere, even though you can't compare it to any other COP events, because I think this was your first one, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. But I mean, about almost 2,500 lobbyists were given access to COP28, which is a record number. And for me, it's ridiculous. But anyway, that's what happened. And the second point is, a lot of those lobbyists, especially the ones out of the US, since the turn of this year, have spent millions spreading confusing misinformation about the global energy market, and also the impact of phasing out fossil fuels. Should that not serve as some kind of an indicator as to the dangers of allowing these kinds of lobby groups not only access to these debates, but thereafter the way that they manipulate the information?
Yes, but by the way,
Yeah.
everybody knew the jig was up. I mean, this by the way, none of what you're saying was everybody was aware of what was going on at COP as well. It was like the highlight of most conversations, especially in the sort of activist community. So none of this is new. We all know that there's a lot of greenwashing and glossing over. Is there a role for the UNFCCC to sort of take a more serious role in determining how registrations are approved and so on? Absolutely. But it is very challenging, because sometimes, I mean, of course, there's official organizations that have direct association and can get passes. But then some people come in and are registered through a separate organization. So you might not necessarily know, you might think that they're part of this organization, but actually they represent another organization. And so it's very hard to monitor these things. But I mean, everyone's aware, and I don't think anyone's living under an illusion of what's real and what's not. I will say to you, I would say, and I would, my personal feeling on this is, let's stop subsidizing the oil and gas industry. let's start investing heavily into renewables. Yes, there is a transition that needs to take place. We can't just switch off and then go into, it's not realistic. But we need to start investing heavily into that transition period and what comes next. The challenge is that we don't have one solid alternative that's going to solve our problems, and that is a real challenge. Whatever way you look at it, and the world does need to keep moving, and that's again a reality that one of the major factors that we're facing. And so there's a desire to, obviously, for certain industries to stay in the game, but there is also sometimes this approach of oversimplifying the challenges when it's not as simple as it may seem. And sometimes, you can overcome these quite easily, and then other times it's not as simple as that. And again, it goes back to the big issue, which is that it's various different countries all negotiating with their own agendas in mind, with thinking about what's at stake for their economies, what's at stake for their ability to stay in power. Let's not forget about that, but also the people. So some leaders are thinking about their people, some may not be. But it's a very complex. It's a very complex situation. But do you just, as I said before about ignoring countries, do you just ignore an entire industry and push forward? You can't do it, because we are dependent on them as well, and we need to bring them. We need to bring them with us, but we need to find a way to put this as something in their interest, and that comes through the policymakers.
Yeah, but unfortunately, most of the policymakers have been funded by the organizations, the companies, which invariably are the bad guys in this. The oil producers, the automotive industry, and plastics, and so on. And they provide a lot of the funding for campaigns and so on. So they have a direct influence on policies. So,
you know what? It's not just that. It's who's the loudest. I mean, I've been in situations where I've seen that we expect our policymakers to really understand the issues. We expect them to be knowledgeable about all these various different big issues, and in fact, they aren't. I can't say where, but I was privy to something recently where a potential political candidate didn't know where this country was in the world, and assumed it was in Africa. I mean, and it was like nowhere near the African continent. So, I mean, I think that just summarizes to you about how much knowledge is missing. And, as you say, whoever A, shouts the loudest, or B, puts together the most compelling evidence, gets heard or seen. So, yeah.
Or who pays for more advertising, or who owns more media, and so on. We could talk about this to our heart's content.
Yeah, but I mean, look, and sometimes we need to think about going back to partnerships. How can we work together? How can we make this mutually beneficial for all parties? Because let's also not forget something. And I think, again, a lot of these companies employ huge workforces. They're literally, they're an integral part of an economy. And these people also need to be reskilled and transitioned into new roles. We're having these major revolts because the world is moving at a rapid pace, and we're not able to transition as quickly as we need to prepare for this new revolution we're living in. And that is just as important. So, as I say, it's multifaceted, it's challenging. We need to find a way to make sure that we're not leaving people behind as well, because that was the big thing that I think that's been one of the big takeaways we've seen from the tumultuous sort of political era where we've been living in over the last decade, is that we failed to address the big issues, and we are where we are today because of that.
No, I completely agree. I think everything that you said is correct. Obviously, because of our sort of alternate political perspectives, we both look at the same thing, but from a different viewpoint.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, I think these organizations do employ lots of people and underpay them. I think these
Some are
organizations,
paid very well.
some are, yes, of course, but it really depends which end of the scale that we're looking at. I think there are a lot of these organizations. I mean, I remember the last winter, the prices that lots of people had to pay, which for heating, the money that they didn't have. And then halfway through 2023, yeah, they were all announcing their £1 billion profits, and wow, they'd never made so much money. I'm not surprised, because they screwed the little guy, and they
So
do it
what was
over and over again, and they can do the
and
same
what
thing this year.
and what's really scary is that they were saying at COP that so they like 60,000 people in Europe died because of extreme weather, right? Cold or warmth. And I see this in Cyprus a lot. So, I mean, I was just there, and I was talking to someone, and I said to them, I said, how does the average person, because Cyprus has always been somewhat expensive, but it's becoming even more expensive. And average rent has gone up, salaries haven't really gone up. So you're not seeing, I mean, the England has the same challenge as well. I think it's a global challenge. But anyway, I was in Cyprus. It gets to the point where certain, elderly people in the summer, because they don't want to pay for the air conditioning, sadly pass away because of heat, and others die because of cold, because they don't want to turn on their heatings. I mean, it's a very sad situation when people, the most disadvantaged in our communities are the ones that are bearing the sort of brunt of climate change. So we need to figure a way out of this, and it's got to be done collectively. And it's just like a workplace. You could work in an office. You don't have to like everybody, but you need to figure out how to work together. And everybody needs to figure out how to work together, whether you like them or not, because we're all in it together, and everybody needs to do this together. It's not something that one country can carry forward with.
Yeah. One common theme which often comes up, seeing as though you use the simile of the office, one of the main factors behind stress nowadays is poor management. And I think the problem that I have with the petrochemical companies and the way that they are kind of pushing forward, their greenwashing and all of the activities that their lobby groups are advertising with regards to, is that they are currently more or less running the show with regards to the access they have to political decision makers. And I think you're right, we do have to work with these organizations, but we cannot have them leading the argument. We need them to be on the sidelines.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And look, I mean, a perfect example of this is a global plastics treaty that's being negotiated at the moment. So launched last year. The treaty negotiations process is obviously trying to come up with a global plastics treaty. Of course, it's led by countries, and in fact, some businesses are very frustrated because they're on the sidelines. They're not privy to the sort of inner discussions. Obviously, the NGO community is there, the philanthropic community is there, but it's the ambition is to kind of make sure that you're getting something that's robust. Now, how that process is going at the moment, I would say I have mixed feelings about it. However, it's something that this is a very important element of it. But then you also have to we have to demand better from our politicians as people.
Absolutely.
We need to get in the right kind of leadership. You look around you today, and you struggle to see good leadership. And by the way,
in any country.
In most countries, and again, all very subjective, because what I consider good leadership, somebody else will think is not good leadership.
True.
But we are
Fair
struggling with leadership. But I am going to. This is a plug-in slightly,
okay.
but an excellent podcast that we launched, Boss Class. Cannot recommend it enough. where one of our editors basically interviews various different business leaders around the world, actually, trying to sort of learn how to be a better manager. And I think that, leadership, whether it's in whatever arena you're in, requires management, and you need to know how to manage people, and you need to know how to manage situations, and you need to have the right people around you to give you the right advice. Don't get led astray. Don't fall into pressure, into peer pressure. I always think back to Brexit, and that was a perfect example of a leader that let the voices get the better of him. He knew better, but he
thought he knew better. Judging, if you're talking about the individual who's become
foreign secretary.
Yeah, okay, yeah, foreign secretary. You talk about that idiot. I'd hoped he knew better. He clearly doesn't.
No, but anyway. I mean, he fell prey to the voices. He let people influence him.
Yeah. The worms that ate his brain cells and have him talking out of his ass now, if you don't mind me saying. Anyway, okay, I may decide to edit that out. I may decide not to edit it out. Anyway, but that's a different matter.
Edit that out.
Yeah. Anyway, I got that guy. Absolutely. Anyway, just about a couple more things, and then I'll let you get on with your evening because you're probably tired as well. But the USA and India plan on significant increases in oil production this year, which I understand development argument that people have put forward for countries such as India. And so I definitely do not want to take the view that, the West has done all the shit that they've done, but you guys can't do it. But I don't think this significant increase in oil production is necessarily the best way forward. No. And there needs to be some other kind of system introduced which allows the world to share energy production far more fairly and in a way which will also benefit countries such as India without forcing them to undertake this kind of production increase. The other issue that I have at the moment, you talked about football before. Right now, there is an event in Africa taking place called the African Cup of Nations. It's sponsored by Total Energies. And, we see in England, in the Premier League, the impact of, oil countries, producing countries on the game. The greenwashing just, it is pushing forward unabated, shamelessly, and it's turned me off the game. I don't want to watch it anymore. It absolutely gets on my nerves. I can't possibly explain how much. How could you stop this juggernaut of these organizations just taking over every sport, every facet of entertainment that they can get their grubby, dirty hands on? It's criminal.
Regulation. There's got to be standard. Listen, I saw the other day, my friend posted this and I was like, well, what is this about? I read that FKA Twigs, which is she's a musician and I think she's also an actress, and she was in a Calvin Klein ad. The advertising authorities in the UK banned an advert of hers for a Calvin Klein ad that she was in, because it sort of, I don't know, it upset, two people complained or something like that. Anyway, it's a photo of her. She's not, she's naked, but you don't see her naked body. You just see the side of her, sort of, one side of her sort of boob and the side boob, and then of course the legs. And it's a phenomenal photo in my opinion. And she's wearing this shirt, and then she called out the advertising standard authorities because there's, at the same time, there's this male model, I think he's an actor, who's running the same Calvin Klein ads alongside hers, and he's just wearing like sort of white tighty boxers, Calvin Klein boxers, and he's half naked, but he's full frontal, and you can see the bulge. And she's like, the double standards are ridiculous, right? So if the advertising standard authorities can weigh in on something as so, in my opinion, moronic as this, like embrace this wonderful body, because this woman's body is like, it's not a standard. It's not, it's not a slender figure. It's a toned figure. It's a body that's sort of been through things. If they're so offended by that and they can weigh in on that, then they can weigh in on other things. And I'm not saying the ASA can, but other similar like organizations like the Premier League, they have a responsibility to ensure that what's being put out is based on the values of the organizations and the clubs. Unfortunately, though, money is a big issue, and these clubs need a lot of money, and there's only a handful of type of organizations that are going to provide you with that money, and that's why they sort of go to these people. It's again, regulation would help regulate this. But I don't know if it's realistic, given the fact that these are the guys that are willing to put their hands in their pockets. I mean, I just saw that the British Museum accepted 50 million from BP for the renovations of the British Museum. And, I'm a bit flabbergasted, because I do personally think, I'm not going to compare this to sports, but if the British Museum had approached a couple of foundations, they could have very quickly raised 50 million to do those renovations. They didn't need BP to pay for it. They just needed better people in their organization to go out and request for that funding. But it's easier to go to BP, who's just going to give you one big chunk of 50 million, rather than dealing with 5 different donors, and them giving you, a few million here, a few million there, a few million here. But with sports, I mean, it's a challenge. I don't really know how you address that, but it's always been a challenge. Marlboro used to sponsor, Philip Morris used to sponsor F1, and the drinks industry sponsors them. I mean, these are the kinds of companies that have the money, want to, and also it's I don't know. I don't have an answer for you on this.
Yeah, it would have been unfair to have expected a conclusive suggestion from you to completely change an industry. But yeah,
I would say to you, maybe ask your audience what they think. Ask your audience what they think, and let's crowdsource and see what other ideas people have. I don't off the top of my head, I don't have other than regulation, I don't really have anything else to as a solution.
Yeah, that's fair enough. But I appreciate that, because it's according to the reputation of socialism, that's a very socialist suggestion. So I'll take that from you. Yeah. So Tatiana, thank you very much for being such a sport. We really have to get that capitalism versus socialism debate on in 2024. So I'll be in touch, and we can get that sorted.
Yeah, that will be an exciting conversation. It will either descend into chaos or not.
I will retain the power of the edit, but I will be as fair to you as always. So
now I'm worried.
No, don't worry about it. It's all good. Thanks, Tat. It's great speaking with you. Well done. Thanks. Seriously, respect to all of the projects, all of the things that you've achieved, and for the things that you are going to achieve. All the best to you.
Thank you, Zach. Same to you, and thank you for having me. It's always lovely catching up with you, and more sooner rather than later, I'd say, for the next one.
Two and a mic. Two.